So thank you for the introduction. My name is Ben Dressler and I'm doing research in psychology. And I want to talk to you about fun today and more specifically why I think that fun sucks. And this might be a bit counterintuitive for most of you, but actually I'm not that different. I perceive the same things as fun that most of you go. So I have fun in sports, meeting with friends, going out, playing video games, obviously. So the thing is, I'm a bit of a divorced kid between psychology and video games because I have a background with both of them, and I really like both, but they don't seem to get along so well with each other. Luckily, this has evolved a bit in the recent past. Psychologists have started to look beyond the violence and the addiction part. And on the other hand, game design companies, big companies like Valve, like Microsoft, like Blizzard, they start using psychological methodologies for improving the player testing. And that's actually a good thing that they start to try to measure more professionally, for example, with interviews, with question answer calls, but also they start implementing stuff like brainwave analysis. And the only problem with this leaves is why do you measure it and what do you actually measure? And so basically you can measure fun. Of course you can go and measure fun. It's very easy. You can devise a questionnaire, you can sit someone in front of YouTube, you type in the word cat, and then you just go away. The problem is, what does that tell you when you're developing a game or any kind of other service that you want to be fun? Because the problem is, what is fun? If you do this kind of research, you measure fun like this, then maybe the solution that will come up is, if you're doing an ultra-violent 3D shooter, the research will get you to the point where you have to add more kittens to that, and that does not make much sense. So the problem is, what can you do with this? And the whole thing about game design and game designers is that they have a really deep understanding about the architecture of games and what elements are in there. They've analyzed this for the past decades. But the problem is that if you look up definitions of games, then you find fun a lot of times somewhere in the definitions. People say that fun is the most important outcome of the game or of the service. There are a lot of people who say, for example, that the implementation of the iPhone, the most important thing was not that it had a very good usability, but that it was fun. And the problem, if you look at fun, is that if you take a closer look, and in my case from a psychological perspective, then you end up with a lot of more concepts that are related to fun. So for example, beliefs, perception, memory, needs, all this kind of stuff. And when you look even closer at that, then you end up with more concepts, and you can measure all of those as well. And here's a crazy thought, but maybe human behavior and human functioning is more complex than fun. Obviously, it's good if you let people rate your game and they rate it as fun. But the real question is, and what will actually make your money, is their behavior. So are people telling their friends about your product? Are people playing the game? And the question that we have to face is, if you're looking at fun, then how does fun relate to behavior? Or does it relate at all? And this is a study results by a study of Scott Rigby. He's a US psychologist who has done work on games. And he measured fun. He asked people how much fun they had using the product, in this case playing video games. And then he measured how this related to a couple of other factors that we should think of as important. And what he found was that there was no relation whatsoever of fun and perceived value. So if people had more fun, that did not mean that they perceived the product they were playing as more valuable. The same goes for enthusiasm, which is a bit surprising, because you would think people are enthusiastic about something that is fun to them, but at least the way it was measured, it was not. The same picture for interest in other products by the developer. And most importantly, there was no relation whatsoever between fun and the retention. They measured it over 9 months. But the fact was people had fun, they said they had fun, but they didn't play the game for a while. So let's recap this for once. Can we measure fun? Of course we can. But does it help us predict behavior? And obviously it does not. Is it specific enough to help us improve our products? Not really, just if you want to do a shoot with kids. And what do we do now? I've been doing research, or I'm doing research right now on the topic of gamification, and I think most of you will know where to place this word. Very briefly, gamification is basically you ask the question, what elements that are from games can we take, can we cut out, and how can we implement them into real-world contexts? And use game elements to motivate health behavior or just player retention or how much people buy your stuff. And the question is, how can we motivate these kinds of behaviors? Because games have this overwhelming ability of motivate behaviors that don't make sense at the first place. I mean, it's not really logical that people put back their needs for food, for sleep, or even for reproduction to play video games. So, if you look at this through the lens of fun, then you have some kind of theory, you have some kind of explanation, but it is very shallow. It is like taking water and looking under what conditions does it turn to ice. And if all you have is the assumption that cold does turn water into ice, then you can make some predictions, and if you have cold, if you have water, then you can produce ice cubes, for example. But if you look a bit deeper and you find a theory about the atomic structure and what happens in the atomic structure when water turns to ice, then suddenly you get a much better understanding and you get much more applications you can develop from this. For example, you can develop frost protection for your car. And this is where psychology comes in game development, because psychology is not what some of you might still believe. It's not about the couch, it's not about talking about your dreams, it's not about talking about childhood traumas. Psychology nowadays is mostly about theories, sometimes very sophisticated theories, about why humans act in the way they do. And these are some theories that have been applied to video games. I will give you a short overview. Incentive theories, that's basically everything that has to do with rewards. So what kind of rewards does a game give and how does this influence player behavior? And there is flow experience, that might be a familiar term. Cognitive theories, that includes the whole usability thing. And need theories, and especially, and I want to focus on that for the rest of the presentation, the self-determination theory. It is a theory that has a lot of empirical backing, and it is applied to a lot of contexts, and has been developed by these two gentlemen, Richard Ryan and Edward Deci. And what self-determination theory basically says is that there are some fundamental human needs, psychological needs, and if you satisfy them, people will act intrinsically. So not for a reward, not for money, but for themselves and for their activity. And these needs are, the needs these guys are proposing are the need for competence, the need for autonomy, which David mentioned before, and the need for relatedness. So before we take a brief look into those needs, I want to emphasize, because this presentation is a lot about video games, because this theory has been applied a lot about video games, but you can also apply this to everything else, basically. You can, if you're interested in gamification, if you're interested in motivating behavior in sports, in work, in education, it has all been done with this theory. And if you're interested in that, you can approach me during the next 2 days, basically, and I can tell you a bit more about that. So let's join and go into the first need, the need for competence. And this basically translates to the need to feel effective. And this need, basically innate need that makes you engage in activities that give you the sense that you're achieving a goal, that you're progressing, that you're advancing, or basically that you elicit reactions from your environment. And this happens very early on, as most parents will know. And there are some factors that enhance this kind of satisfaction. That is useful feedback, that is telling you not only how good you're doing, but also what you can improve. Then there's optimal challenge. that is this sweet spot between something being too easy and being too difficult. Mastery experience basically means that you get chances and opportunities to show off what you can, and context, that is basically just reframing the situation. For example, if you look at Minesweeper, it's not about just clicking somewhere, it's about defusing bombs, or basically all video games are just about doing some puzzles, but they have context of saving the world and doing something that's epic. And on the contrary, there are also factors that diminish the need satisfaction or thwart it. And that is every time that something is too easy, so you don't feel challenged at all, or it is too hard. If you have, this is very specific for video games, if you have control issues that you can't do what you want to do and it does not work, or if this is specific, if there is any at all, is unspecific. The feedback is unspecific, sorry. And I want to show you some examples of video games that do that very excellently. And if you know Bulletstorm, it is a game that makes you kick ass, literally. It is not very easy, but when you are successful in this game, you own so hard that it's almost ridiculous. Games like Guitar Hero or Rock Band, they're very important in the way they give you feedback, because they give you three kinds of feedback. The first feedback is some sort of imminent feedback. So whenever you perform an action, you know immediately, is it good or not? Was it successful or not? Then they give you streak feedback. So they give you an idea of how long you were successful without messing up. And finally, with, for example, by the songs you have achieved to do perfectly, you know your lifetime achievement. And there are games like this, like Shadow of the Colossus. It is a game that is basically about jumping and climbing, but it feels like you're fighting skyscraper-sized giants, which obviously is more epic. So the second need is the need for autonomy, and David talked a little bit about that in a different context. But for video games and basically everything else, it means the need to feel volitional. Do what you want to do, take what you want to do, be allowed to do what you want to do. And again, this happens very early on. If you have a kid in the range of 3 years of age and you try to diminish this need with them, then you will know what kind of hell you can unleash by doing that. Again, factors that enhance this satisfaction are unique identity, being able to be who you want to be, to create an image that you want to have. Also opportunities for action, so that you have chances to do something, and a choice of how you want to do it and what you want to do. The same is obviously again on the opposite. You have forced action, you have fake opportunities. For example, in video games, if you have a door but the door is just a texture, you can't use it actually, that can diminish the feeling of autonomy, or any way of losing control, so being not allowed to do what you just want to do in this moment. Some examples again, Red Dead Redemption, if you know it, is a great example, but because first of all, you're free. You can do whatever you want, you can go wherever you want. But it is not just an open world where you can go anywhere, you have opportunities for action anywhere. There's always a rabid bunch of dogs, somewhere there's a villager to save, so there are always opportunities for action. But even if you don't want to do this, if you don't want to follow these invitations, then you can still do it without suffering. And the whole avatar thing, that is very popular in gamification right now, because it's such a neat little thing that you can just take without the other game mechanics and apply it, allowing players to create a personality and an avatar that is very unique for them and that does not look like every other player. And finally, everything that goes into the direction of having choices to make, being able to select players, weapons, paths, missions, and even hold strategies, so that you have, even if you have just one goal, that you have a lot of different ways of reaching this goal. And this is a very important distinction. Autonomy is not equal to choices. Just because you have a lot of choices does not mean that people will feel a feeling of autonomy, because autonomy means doing what you do because you want to do it. So please keep that in mind if you're trying to adapt this.
And the last need is the need for relatedness. This kind of is everything that you would associate with the word of social. It means the need for forming and keeping meaningful relationships. And this can mean that you are, by some kind, you're acknowledged for what you're doing, or just having some sense of intimacy or mutual support. And this is basically what increases the need satisfaction for relatedness: being acknowledged, receiving support, or making an impact on another person's existence. If you're, on the other hand, in an environment where you're isolated, where you're meeting hostile conditions, or even worse, the feeling of indifference, so what you do does not matter to anybody, then the need for relatedness will be impacted. And obviously, multiplayer games are an obvious example for relatedness. Games like Team Fortress 2, they offer you different roles, different ways that you can interact with the game. And just by this design, they make sure that whenever you play the game, you have the feeling that you make a unique contribution to the game, because nobody else who does not play your character can do the same thing. Also, other team achievements, like in World of Warcraft, this is a famous guild doing a world first kill. These are group achievements that you could never manage to get done alone. But the thing is, anybody had one of those? These are just like 100 pixels, but if those pixels die and turn into a tombstone, you're pretty sad. And there is a lot of research on that humans not only relate to other humans, but also try to project human characteristics into virtual inanimated things. And this means that in games you can try to achieve this by implementing a good storyline that really builds up characters that you can relate to. Or just by having a very good AI that acts if it's real. But also, this is an image from Diablo 3, you can just have some NPCs standing around when you pass them and they go like, oh, our hero, he's so great, he saved our town. Even that can give you a slight insight or a slight impression of that you're actually doing something that matters in the world of those characters. So the question we have to ask ourselves now, because before I was bashing pretty hard on fun, is need satisfaction any better? And this is from the same study as before. The researcher measured the need satisfaction on these three needs and tried to relate it to the same factors. And it might not surprise you, but he found relations to any single one of them. So the need satisfaction was able to predict what fun was not able to predict. I think that is a pretty important finding. So let's assume just for the moment that this need theory is pretty awesome and we all like it. Then we still have the question, how can we turn this into some kind of application? How can we improve our products with the knowledge about this theory? And I want to give you a short case study. That was what David mentioned earlier. It is Tank Wars, a game by some of the Hack Forward developers. It's a tank deathmatch real-time multiplayer game. It is developed by in Unity 3D as a cross-platform game, and it is has been published on Facebook, on BigPoint, and on some other platforms. And a very important reality for an indie developer is that is not you. So since we had on Tank Wars, we had not a really big budget on playtesting, something like this. We had to come up with our own whole plan of attack, so we had to start from scratch basically. And what we did was we looked at available research and took everything from the three needs, everything we could find about the three needs, and also from some other theories like the game flow, usability, stuff like that, and merged it. And what we tried to come up with, and we came up with, is a procedure that we call the inventory of for game motivation and experience. And this consists of these three steps. First, we did a developer training, then we had a player questionnaire developed, and we kind of summarized this all in a motivational review. The developer review basically meant that I gave those guys the long version of this presentation, and then we tried to come up with questions. The goal was to make the developers ask themselves questions that are related to the three needs. For example, what kind of feedback do I get in the game, or to what extent can players influence their identity. So in the first step they started to think about these issues themselves. And next we went to the players and asked the players who were actually playing the game. For this we did develop a questionnaire, and this questionnaire touched on the 3 needs. So we had different items for the different needs. For example, when I failed, I knew why, and this is directly related to the need for competence. And we asked them to rate this. And after this questionnaire, we got a big picture of how the 3 needs were satisfied by the game in the eyes of the viewer. And this is what we ended up with. So what you can see is all 3 needs were satisfied about average, a bit slightly above average. And this is very good for relatedness and autonomy in this case, because for action games it has been found that competence is the need that is most crucial in predicting player behavior. So what we took away from this is that in any kind of prioritizing of future developments, we would focus on implementing or improving features that had to do with competence. And last but not least came the motivational review that kind of summed it all up. And it was basically a report with some pictures in it, with some graphs in it, a bit more extensive than I presented here, and some texts to give players and the developers an idea about how the needs are satisfied in Tank Wars. So this is right at the point where we are now with Tank Wars and with the developer Yoon. We're trying to implement what we are finding with the players. We're trying to further develop our research tools, and we're pretty excited about how we will be able to track player behavior, because that's something we're also doing, and see how this relates to the need satisfaction. So for now, thank you for listening.